The wind was a blade, sharp and merciless, slicing through the threadbare wool of her cloak. It howled like a starved wolf, a sound that echoed the emptiness in Alara's own soul as she stumbled through the deepening snow. Each step was a battle against the blizzard's fury, a fury that seemed a physical manifestation of the betrayal that had cast her out here to die. The trees, skeletal and white with ice, clawed at her with their frozen fingers, their groaning limbs a chorus of despair. Her breath was a ghost in the air, a fleeting puff of warmth in a world that had turned to unforgiving crystal. Silas Blackwood's face swam before her eyes, handsome and cruel, his smile a predator's snarl as his men had dragged her from the carriage and thrown her into the wilderness. He had called it a lesson in obedience, a final consequence for refusing to be his possession, his pretty, educated bride. But it was not a lesson, it was a death sentence. The cold was no longer a sensation on her skin, but a deep, invading presence within her bones, a lethargy that promised a sweet, final sleep. She sank to her knees, the last of her strength unraveling like a frayed rope. The whiteness of the snow and the encroaching gray of the sky began to merge, the world fading into a single, silent note of oblivion. This was the end, she thought, not with a scream, but with a quiet, hollow ache. A life of books and kindness, of quiet hopes and gentle dreams, was to be buried unceremoniously beneath a blanket of indifferent ice. The last thing she saw before the darkness claimed her was the vast, empty expanse, a perfect mirror of the desolation left by a man's pride. Have you ever wondered what happens when a soul forged in gentleness is thrust into the heart of a storm? When the carefully constructed walls of a civilized life are torn down by the raw, untamed power of both nature and human cruelty. This is the story of such a soul, a woman named Alara, who was left for dead in the unforgiving embrace of a frontier winter. It is a tale of survival, yes, but more than that, it is a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest strength is found not in fighting the storm, but in weathering it until a new dawn. It is a story that asks a simple yet profound question: can a heart, frozen by betrayal and loss, ever truly learn to feel the warmth of the sun again? Join us as we journey into that blizzard, into a time of rugged landscapes and even more rugged hearts, to witness how a single act of honor could change the course of two lives forever. The man moved through the blizzard not as an intruder, but as a part of the storm itself. His name was Coda, and this land, with its brutal winds and deep snows, was the only sanctuary he had left. The world of men, with its treaties written in ink and broken with steel, had taken everything from him. His wife, Mourning Dove, and his young son, Little Hawk, were ghosts that walked beside him in these silent woods, their laughter stolen by the sharp crack of a soldier's rifle. He had retreated here, to this isolated cabin nestled deep in the mountains, to live with his grief, a companion as constant and as cold as the winter. His heart was a fortress of ice, its gates barred against a world that had proven its capacity for casual destruction. He was hunting, tracking a buck through the blinding snow, when a splash of color against the white caught his eye. It was a patch of deep blue, the color of a summer sky, almost completely buried. He approached with the cautious grace of a predator, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. He expected a lost parcel, perhaps, or a piece of a traveler's wagon, but as he brushed the snow away, he found the pale, still face of a woman. A white woman. Every instinct, honed by years of pain and mistrust, screamed at him to turn away. Her people were the source of his sorrow, the architects of his solitude. To help her would be to invite that world, with all its treachery, back into his life. He saw the fine quality of her cloak, the delicate features of her face, and knew she was from that other place, a place of soft hands and broken promises. He stood over her for a long moment, the wind whipping his long, dark hair across his face, a war raging within him. The past whispered poison in his ear, urging him to leave her to the fate the storm had ordained. But a deeper truth, an honor that was woven into the very fabric of his being, refused to be silenced. His people did not leave the helpless to perish. It was a law older than any treaty, more sacred than any bitterness. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all his losses, Coda knelt. He gathered the woman's limp form into his powerful arms, her surprising lightness a stark contrast to the heaviness in his own spirit. He turned his back on his hunt and began the long, arduous trek back to his cabin, carrying the very embodiment of his past pain, an unwelcome guest delivered by the unpitying storm. For 3 days, the world outside the small cabin ceased to exist, buried under the relentless siege of the blizzard. And for 3 days, Ilara drifted in a fevered haze, a twilight realm between life and death. The cabin was a place of shadows and strange, guttural sounds, of a looming presence that was both terrifying and, in some unexplainable way, safe. She would surface from the delirium to find a dark, impassive face leaning over her, spooning a bitter, hot broth between her cracked lips. She would feel the surprising gentleness of large, calloused hands changing the cool, damp cloths on her forehead. She was a prisoner of her own weak body and of this silent, intimidating stranger who had pulled her from the snow. Her fear was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. She knew nothing of this man, only that he was Comanche, a people her former world had taught her to fear as savages. Yet, his actions contradicted every prejudice she had ever heard. He moved with a quiet, deliberate economy, tending the fire, preparing his strange-tasting medicines, checking on her with an intensity that was neither kind nor cruel, but simply present. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a low rumble, like distant thunder. Inside Coda, the storm raged just as fiercely. Having her here, in this space that was sacred to the memory of his family, was a profanation. Her scent, the scent of soap and civilization, was an assault on the pure, wild air of his grief. Every time he looked at her pale, vulnerable face, he saw the faces of the soldiers who had destroyed his world. He tended to her out of a sense of rigid honor, a duty he performed with a stony, resentful heart. He was a protector by nature, but he had sworn never to protect one of them again. Yet he could not stop. He found himself watching the faint rise and fall of her chest, a fragile rhythm that he was now responsible for maintaining. He bathed her feverish skin, his touch impersonal, yet his mind cataloging the bruises on her arms, the cruelty etched upon her body by another's hand. This woman had not been lost to the storm by accident. She had been thrown to it. Someone had wanted her dead. This knowledge stirred something in him, a flicker of protective anger that troubled him deeply. It was an emotion he thought had died with his family. The cabin, once a tomb for his memories, was slowly, unwillingly, becoming something else. It was a crucible, where two broken souls from warring worlds were trapped together, the silence between them thick with unspoken pain, fear, and a nascent, terrifying flicker of connection. The blizzard finally broke, leaving the world outside scoured clean and draped in a blinding, pristine white. As the sunlight, sharp and brilliant, streamed through the cabin's single small window, Ilara's fever broke with it. She awoke to a profound stillness, her mind clear for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The imposing man sat across the small room, sharpening the head of a spear with a piece of flint. The rhythmic scrape of stone on stone was the only sound. Her fear, though still present, was now tempered by a deep, weary curiosity. She pushed herself up on her elbows, the movement sending a wave of dizziness through her. His head snapped up, his dark eyes instantly pinning her in place. The intensity in his gaze was unnerving, as if he could see straight into the fractured pieces of her spirit. "You are awake," he stated. It was not a question. His voice, stripped of the fever's distortion, was even deeper than she remembered, the words clipped and formal. She swallowed, her throat dry. "Yes," she managed, her own voice a fragile whisper. Where am I?" "My home," he said, returning to his work, the deliberate movement a clear dismissal. The silence stretched, and Ilara found a sliver of her old resolve. She would not cower. This man had saved her life, for reasons she could not fathom, and she owed him the courtesy of her courage. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little stronger now. He paused his work but did not look at her. "The snow is deep. You will be here for some time." The finality in his tone sent a fresh chill through her, one that had nothing to do with the winter outside. Days bled into a quiet, unspoken routine. Ilara, still weak but determined to be more than a burden, began to take on small tasks. She swept the hearth with a handmade broom. She learned to grind corn into meal with a heavy stone pestle. She took the worn leather of his spare tunic and, with a needle and thread she found in a small pouch, meticulously mended a tear. Each action was a silent question, a tentative offering of peace. Koda watched her from the corner of his eye. He noted her persistence, the way her hands, though clearly unaccustomed to such labor, were steady and sure. He saw the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, a stark contrast to the arrogant entitlement he associated with her people. He would leave for hours to hunt or check his trap lines, and upon returning he would find the cabin tidier, a simple meal of corn cakes left by the fire, her presence a soft, unwelcome warmth in his cold, ordered existence. One afternoon, he returned to find her attempting to chop a small log for the fire, the axe awkward and heavy in her grasp. He strode over, took the tool from her unresisting hands, and split the log with a single, effortless motion. She looked up at him, her blue eyes wide. "Why did you save me?" The question was direct, unadorned, echoing the way he himself spoke. He stared down at her, the wall around his heart thick and high. But the honesty in her gaze demanded an honest answer. "It is not the Comanche way to leave a life to the wolves," he said, his voice rough. "Whether that life is worth saving is another matter." He turned and walked away, leaving her with the splintered wood and the heavy weight of his words, a response that was both an explanation and a judgment. The sun grew stronger, its light lingering longer each day, coaxing the first signs of a thaw from the frozen earth. The isolation of the mountain cabin, once a source of terror for Ilara, had transformed into a strange kind of sanctuary. Here, the memory of Silas Blackwood's treachery seemed distant, a nightmare from another life. The world was reduced to this small space, to the crackle of the fire, the taste of roasted rabbit, and the quiet, powerful presence of the man who had become her reluctant guardian. The barrier of silence between them began to show small cracks, worn away by the slow, steady drip of shared days. He taught her the names of things in his tongue. Isha, the eagle. Tosa, the white snow. Pia, the good fire. She, in turn, would read to him in the evenings from the single, tattered book she'd had tucked in her cloak, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets. He would listen, his face unreadable in the flickering firelight, as she spoke of love and loss in a language of intricate beauty that was so different from his own terse, earthy speech. One evening, as the shadows grew long, her eyes fell upon a small, intricate carving of a hawk resting on the stone mantel above the hearth. Beside it was a smaller, more delicate carving of a dove. She had noticed them before, but had never dared to ask. Tonight, the quiet comfort between them felt strong enough to bear the weight of a real question. "They are beautiful," she said softly. "Did you make them?" Koda's hands, which were braiding a strip of rawhide, stilled. He stared into the fire, his profile a mask of chiseled stone. A long moment passed, and she thought he would not answer. "They were my family," he said, his voice so low it was almost lost to the flames. He spoke of Morning Dove, of her laughter that sounded like the stream in springtime, of the way she could gentle the wildest colt. He spoke of Little Hawk, his son, whose small hand had fit so perfectly in his, whose eyes had held the endless curiosity of the sky. He told her of the attack on their peaceful camp, not a battle, but a slaughter, led by men in blue coats who shot and burned without reason or mercy. As he spoke, the stoic protector vanished, and in his place was a man hollowed out by a grief so vast it seemed to have no end. The ice fortress around his heart cracked open, and the raw, untamed pain poured out. Listening, Ilara felt her own sorrow rising to meet his. Her own loss felt small and selfish in comparison, but the betrayal, the sudden, violent theft of a future she had believed in, was a familiar wound. When he fell silent, the story told, she did not offer empty platitudes or words of comfort. She simply reached out and told him of Silas Blackwood, of his charming words that hid a heart of rot, of his possessiveness that masqueraded as love, and of the final, cold command that had sent her into the storm. She spoke of her own stolen life, her lost hope. In that small, firelit cabin, surrounded by the immense wilderness, two enemies, a Comanche chief and a white woman, found the one piece of ground they could share, the desolate, sacred land of the broken-hearted. They were no longer just a man and a woman. They were survivors, their shared vulnerability a thread far stronger than the silence that had once separated them. Spring arrived in a rush of meltwater and birdsong, painting the mountainsides in tentative shades of green. The world, it seemed, was waking from a long and difficult sleep. In the valley, a fragile peace had taken root. Ilara and Coda had found a rhythm, a life built of shared tasks and a deepening, unspoken understanding. He taught her which plants held medicine and which held poison. She taught him how to read, his large finger tracing the strange shapes of the letters in her book with intense concentration. The ghost of Mourning Dove no longer stood between them. Instead, her memory was a gentle presence, a reminder of the love Coda was capable of. The hard shell of his grief was softening, warmed by Ilara's quiet strength and unwavering kindness. For Ilara, the terrified woman who had frozen in the snow was gone. In her place was a woman who knew the language of the forest, whose hands were now calloused and capable, whose spirit had been tempered, not broken, by the fire of her ordeal. She no longer saw Coda as a savage captor, but as a man of profound honor and deep, hidden tenderness. She saw the way his eyes would soften when he watched a deer and its fawn at the edge of the clearing, the gentle way he would handle a fledgling that had fallen from its nest. A love, as wild and unexpected as a mountain wildflower, was beginning to bloom in the space between them, a love that neither of them dared to name. But the world beyond their mountain sanctuary had not forgotten them. One afternoon, a lone rider, one of Silas Blackwood's hired guns named Jeb, was tracking a lost steer far from his usual territory. Drawn by a thin wisp of smoke, he crested a ridge and froze. Below him, nestled in a hidden valley, was a small, neat cabin. And there, in the clearing, was the woman his boss had ordered them to leave for dead. She was feeding corn to a horse, her hair glinting in the sun, looking not just alive, but vibrant, healthy. Standing beside her was a tall, formidable-looking Comanche. Jeb's eyes widened in disbelief and a cold, greedy calculation. Silas Blackwood had been consumed by a dark, obsessive rage since Ilara's disappearance, a rage that had only grown with time. He'd offered a handsome reward for any news of her body, but this was better. Bringing her back alive, along with the head of the savage who had kept her, would earn him a fortune. Without a sound, he backed his horse away from the ridge, his mind racing. He turned and spurred his mount into a gallop, the fragile piece of the valley shattering behind him like glass. Later that day, Coda was checking his snares when he found the tracks. A shod horse, ridden hard and fast, heading east. Heading back towards the town, towards Silas Blackwood. He straightened up, his face grim, the brief season of peace coming to an abrupt and violent end. He looked towards the cabin, where Ilara was humming softly as she tended her small, burgeoning garden. The wolves were coming back, and this time, they knew exactly where to find her. The air in the valley grew heavy with a tense, waiting silence. Coda did not need to tell Ilara that they had been found. She saw it in the grim set of his jaw, in the way he now moved with a hunter's coiled readiness. He spent the day reinforcing the cabin's door, checking his rifle, and melting lead to cast new bullets. He was no longer the quiet man sharing stories by the fire. He was a warrior preparing for battle. The transformation was swift and total, a chilling reminder of the violent world that lay just beyond their peaceful mountain. Ilara felt a tremor of her old fear return, but it was a different fear now. It was not for herself, but for him, for the fragile life they had built together. She refused to be a helpless burden. As he worked, she worked alongside him, her movements calm and efficient. She gathered all the water she could, she prepared food that wouldn't need a fire, and she watched him as he showed her, with quiet, patient instruction, how to load the spare rifle. Her hands did not tremble. The woman who had once fainted at the sight of a spider now held the cold, heavy weight of the firearm with a steady resolve. The life she had here was worth fighting for. They did not have to wait long. The following afternoon, they appeared at the edge of the clearing, Silas Blackwood, flanked by Jeb and 4 other grim-faced men, all heavily armed. Silas sat upon a magnificent black stallion, his fine clothes a jarring intrusion in the wild landscape. His face, when he saw Ilara standing in the doorway of the cabin, twisted into a triumphant, possessive sneer. "Ilara, my dear," he called out, his voice smooth and laced with venom. "I see you've found some rather primitive accommodations. Your little adventure is over. Come now. You've caused quite enough trouble." Ilara's chin lifted. "This is my home, Silas. And I am not your dear." A flash of fury crossed Silas's face. He turned his cold eyes to Coda, who stood slightly in front of her, his rifle held loosely at his side. "And you," Silas spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "I don't know what you think you're doing with my property, savage, but you will hand her over now, or we will burn this hovel to the ground with you in it." Coda's voice, when he spoke, was low and dangerous, the sound of rocks grinding together. "She is not property. She is under my protection. Leave this place now and you will live." A harsh laugh erupted from Silas. "I don't take orders from your kind." He raised his hand, a clear signal to his men. In that instant, the world exploded. Coda fired first, his shot so fast it was a blur of motion, and one of Silas's men tumbled from his saddle. The clearing erupted into a cacophony of gunfire, the air thick with the acrid smell of black powder. Coda moved with lethal grace, using the corner of the cabin as cover, his shots precise and deadly. Ilara, her heart pounding, was already inside, doing exactly as he had instructed, laying out the ammunition and beginning to reload the spent rifle with practiced speed. This was not a damsel's rescue, this was a partnership forged in fire. The battle for the small cabin was a brutal, desperate affair. Silas and his men, accustomed to being the aggressors, found themselves facing a ferocity they had not anticipated. Coda was not just a man with a gun, he was a force of nature, a spirit of the mountain itself. He moved between the trees and rocks with a phantom speed, his knowledge of the terrain giving him an almost supernatural advantage. He fought not with the wild rage of his opponents, but with a cold, focused fury, a warrior defending his home, his heart. A stray bullet grazed his shoulder, a hot, searing line of pain. He grunted but didn't falter, retreating back to the cabin door where Ilara was waiting. She saw the blood staining his shirt and her face went pale, but her hands remained steady. "Give me the rifle," he growled, reaching for the newly loaded weapon. "Your shoulder," she said, her voice tight with concern, already tearing a strip from her petticoat. "It is nothing. Load the other one." She pressed the makeshift bandage against the wound, her touch firm. "You cannot fight them all alone." Just as she said it, 2 of Blackwood's men tried to rush the cabin from the side. Thinking Coda was pinned down at the front, they broke from cover. It was a fatal mistake. Ilara, without a moment's hesitation, saw her chance. She grabbed a burning log from the hearth with a pair of tongs and hurled it with all her strength into the pile of dry firewood stacked against the cabin wall nearest the attackers. The woodpile erupted in a whoosh of flame and smoke, creating a blinding, choking screen. The 2 men, startled and disoriented, staggered back, coughing, their eyes streaming. It was the opening Coda needed. He spun around the corner of the doorframe and fired twice. The 2 men fell. Silas, watching his men being picked off one by one, was overcome by a blind, entitled rage. He was Silas Blackwood, he did not lose. He spurred his horse forward, charging directly at the cabin, his pistol raised, his face a mask of insane fury. He was screaming Ilara's name, a sound of pure, possessive madness. Coda stepped out from the doorway, planting his feet firmly on the earth, and raised his rifle one last time. He did not aim for the horse. He looked directly into the eyes of the man who represented everything that had ever brought pain into his world: the greed, the cruelty, the belief that a life could be owned. For a single, stretched-out second, the 2 men locked gazes, the tyrant and the protector. Then Coda fired. Silas was thrown from the saddle as if struck by an invisible fist, his reign of terror ending with a dull, final thud on the hard-packed earth of the valley he had tried to conquer. The sudden, deafening silence that followed the last gunshot was more jarring than the chaos it replaced. The smell of gin smoke hung heavy in the air, a foul incense for the violent rites that had just concluded. The remaining few of Blackwood's men, their leader dead and their numbers decimated, wasted no time. They scrambled for their horses and fled, melting back into the wilderness, their greed and bravado extinguished. Ilara slowly emerged from the cabin, her hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. Her eyes swept over the clearing, over the still forms scattered on the ground, a grim testament to the battle they had just survived. Her gaze finally landed on Koda. He stood unmoving, his rifle still held at the ready, his eyes fixed on the body of Silas Blackwood. The warrior's mask was still in place, his face hard and unyielding. She walked towards him, her steps uncertain on the blood-soaked ground. She stopped before him, gently taking the heavy rifle from his hands and setting it aside. Then she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "It's over," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. At her touch, the tension seemed to drain out of him. The warrior receded, and the man returned, his shoulders slumping with a profound, bone-deep weariness. His dark eyes, which had held the cold fire of battle, softened as they met hers, and in their depths she saw a maelstrom of emotions: relief, sorrow for the lives taken, and something else, something deep and powerful that he had kept locked away for so long. He reached for her, his uninjured arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her against him. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent as if it were the only clean thing left in the world. She clung to him, her fear and adrenaline giving way to an overwhelming wave of gratitude and a fierce, protective love. They had stood together against the storm, against the wolves that had come to tear their world apart. They had fought, not as a man protecting a helpless woman, but as two parts of a whole, each lending their strength to the other. The threat was vanquished, the ghost of her past laid to rest. In the quiet aftermath, standing in the embrace of the man who had saved her in more ways than one, Ilara knew she was finally, truly home. The violence had been a crucible, burning away the last vestiges of their former lives, and from the ashes, something new and unbreakable had been forged. The years that followed were etched not in violence and fear, but in the quiet, steady rhythms of the seasons. The valley, once a place of refuge and battle, became a true home, a sanctuary of their own making. They buried the fallen where they lay, allowing the forest to reclaim the scars of that day, to cover the painful memories with a blanket of wildflowers and pine needles. Koda and Ilara built their life together, a seamless blending of their two worlds. He taught her the secrets of the land, the language of the birds, the wisdom of his people. She, in turn, filled their small cabin with the warmth of her spirit, with the stories from her books, and with a love that soothed the old, deep wounds in his soul. The ghosts of Mourning Dove and Little Hawk did not fade, but they no longer haunted him. Instead, they became cherished ancestors, their spirits honored and remembered, making space for a new love to grow in the heart that had once been closed forever. They were married not by a priest or a justice, but by a simple exchange of vows under the watchful eyes of the ancient mountains, a promise witnessed by the sun and the sky. Soon, the sound of children's laughter echoed through the valley, a sound Koda never thought he would hear again. Their son had his father's dark eyes and his mother's thoughtful brow, and their daughter had her mother's fair hair and her father's fearless spirit. They grew up speaking two languages, understanding two cultures, a living bridge between the world of the Comanche and the world of the settlers. Their home was a place where honor, resilience, and love were the guiding laws. Koda never fully rejoined his people, nor did Ilara ever return to the towns of the East. They had created their own nation, a small, fiercely protected kingdom of two that grew into a family, a testament to the idea that home is not a place you find, but a place you build with the person your soul was always searching for. The stoic protector had found his purpose was not just to guard, but to cherish. The resilient survivor had discovered her strength was not just to endure, but to love without reservation. Their happily ever after was not a grand fairy tale, but something far more real and precious, a quiet, hard-won peace, as beautiful and enduring as the mountains that sheltered them. So, what can we learn from the story of Ilara and Coda? It is a story born of the harsh realities of the frontier, a place of stunning beauty and unforgiving cruelty. Yet, it teaches us a timeless lesson, that even in the coldest winter, in the heart of the most terrifying storm, a single ember of compassion can be enough to spark a new life. It reminds us that the human heart, no matter how deeply wounded or encased in ice, possesses an incredible capacity for healing. Coda, a man who had lost everything, found a new reason to live by saving the life of someone he was taught to hate. Ilara, a woman betrayed and left to perish, found her true strength and a deeper love than she had ever imagined in the arms of a supposed savage. Their story proves that true connection transcends the boundaries of culture, prejudice, and past sorrows. It is a testament to the idea that family is not always the one we are born into, but the one we find, the one we fight for, and the one we build together. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest trials are not meant to break us, but to break us open, clearing the way for a future we never could have foreseen. If the journey of Ilara and the honorable chief who claimed her has touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. What part of their story resonated with you the most? We love hearing from you. And for more inspirational tales of romance, redemption, and the enduring power of the human spirit, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thank you for joining us.